What's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like here at I Mix What I Like. I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Just wanted to add this very quick update to the clip you're about to see that adds such a perfect additional frame to my problems with the Whitney Webb article in question. So, salute to the Double O African community for your critical engagement and, in particular, this very insightful contribution. So, the point made was that Whitney Webb's website is named Unlimited Hangout, which is itself an important play on what the intelligence community in the United States would refer to as limited hangouts and even modified limited hangouts. And there's even a wiki page on it. I'll put the link in the show description, refers to the Nixon administration and its use of this concept and approach, of course. And the point being that when the state knows there's going to be some information leaked or released or that is going to be exposed in some way, rather than denying or running away from it, manage the frame of it, manage the narrative of it by offering limited hangouts. So, yes, Webb's website is a play on that and says it's an unlimited hangout. And as you'll see, understanding it this way, an important component I left out is very helpful to understanding the struggle that you see me engage in this clip. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy. All right, again, please, everybody, like, share, subscribe, put in your comments, put this in your socials, and let's move right along here. So, all right, the link is in the show description to this story. One label under Blackmail: the early intersections of Diddy and the Epstein network. There's a lot to go through in this, and I'm not going to do it justice. So I'm going to encourage everybody to definitely read this. It's part one of a forthcoming 3-part series. But there are a couple of points in here that I want to bring up that I don't think will likely get discussed in many other circles where this story is brought up at all. My overall summary point here, as I wrote in my note, is the article takes us away from political analysis to and toward sort of a more empty conspiracy theory. The overlap between Whitney Webb's arguments and my own are there. We do in fact make similar arguments, but they're made differently and framed differently to encourage different responses. I think, so in other words, when there is discussion of how a music industry with all kinds of interconnected corporate and otherwise ties to the broader geopolitical universe that manipulates the popular form of the content, there's a lot of overlap there. She and I make very similar arguments. There's a lot I agree with, but I think and I don't know how she'll proceed in the next, and I don't know enough about her to know where she is already politically, but I but my argument is, I think, despite what dear brother Stephen Ferguson has had to say, and we're still trying to work out if I'm waiting to hear back on scheduling his appearance. But despite his criticism, I think I make a very material political argument that looks to explain the particular oppressive conditions Black people are in, and that I use the mixtape and hip hop as a way of explaining those conditions, with ultimately the idea that with a particular political analysis and framing, Black people and others would be encouraged into certain forms of political activity in response. This article mirrors for me too much of of a more ambiguous, amorphous politics that allows people, and readers will be able to take this everywhere. If you have any form of critical thought about this society, I mean, if you want to focus on the Jews did it, this is definitely for you. If you want to focus on a more broader, the white folks did it, this is for you. If you want to focus on the mafia and the sex and the abuse and the freak offs, this article is for you. But if you want, or if you would hope that a reader would walk away from this with some sort of political clarity that the Diddy experience or story might help us expose. I don't think we get that. So that's just my overall, and then we can just sort of quickly. But the bottom line is that so in what she does here, she shows like there's a lot here, a lot of research here. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of circumstantial evidence, a lot of that looks like that is, but there's not really the smoking gun, pun intended. There's not the kinds of concrete connections made. And again, that's why I think that there's a lot left that, but essentially between the mafia, the corporate world, a little bit of the intelligence community, there's some CIA stuff in here, all of that has conspired to create conditions where Diddy, much like she says of Epstein, are not the power themselves. They are themselves manipulated by power, but kind of like Brett Ratner here, Andre Harrell, and Russell Simmons, all end up becoming sort of pawns in a broader, not to justify their behavior, but they're not the dominant power force here. It should be no surprise upon closer examination that of Sean Combs, like Epstein, he was operating on behalf of a larger network that he did not ultimately control. So that's sort of, you know, the so she goes back and forth in the article with Puffy's history, his sort of rise in the music industry around 1993 with the help of Andre Harrell. She goes into some of his childhood, where his father Melvin it looks to be assassinated as a potential informant, himself being involved in the mafia connected drug trade in Harlem. Uh, he was found shot in the head. So again, there's a lot of this in there. There's some fascinating stuff. It's wild. Saying that Melvin Combs had actually been an informant. Then Puffy goes to this Catholic school, Mount St. Michael's Academy, and then there's all kinds of wild scandals, abuse, a whole bunch of stuff happens. A whole bunch of teachers and administrators get caught. Uh, there's speculation that one of the main known victims was a classmate of Puffy. So so just from early on, they're just depict showing Puffy to be all caught up in this hypersexual, hyper violent, hyper abusive environment, so that by the time he ends up getting into the music industry, which is accurately noted here to be itself an extension of a criminal enterprise. I mean, it's the mafia that and I just saw a discussion with Fantano and what's his name? What's my guy's name? The other big music, the older white guy that I like his channel too. What's his name? Rick Beato. And they talk about how the music industry that was set up by it was initially sort of taken over and evolved by a mafia that had been put out of business once liquor was made legal, and they needed new criminal ventures. So they got into, of course, drugs and sex work, but then also the music industry. And again, one of my favorite books on the history of that industry is called Hitmen, for a reason, because it's about people who make hit records and hits. So anyway, so they talk about the rise of Lear Cohen, how he pushed Rick Rubin out to get to be partners with Russell Simmons. They talk about Kim Porter and Andre Harrell's relationship and Puffy's relationship. Of course, they talk about the music industry, MCA, mob, they call it Mob Corporation of America, that peaked under the Reagan administration, who of course died during my wedding, you know, and Les Wasserman. So there's a lot of fascinating characters. I've read about Wasserman and all these, like these very conservative ties to the state. And they talk about in this article how Reagan was himself, as we've talked about many times, himself used as an actor to suppress socialism and workers' rights, and then of course became the menace that he became for so many years. This video is also interesting, a short, reminder of the mob's relationship to MCA. of course, the promotion of Zionism through Edgar Bronfman. I used to talk about all these cats. I mean, in my earlier work, I Mix What I Like, and elsewhere, a lot of presentations around this, the Bronfman's connection to the music industry. And again, my point was always that when you look at the broader interconnected web of politics, intelligence, the state, et cetera, what you end up with is, again, a very politicized need to manipulate the popular culture of a oppressed community to aid in the to ease the process of their oppression, to not only extract money and profit, but to manipulate the cultural production and expression, to manipulate the public opinion, much like propaganda. So it's so I don't have any problem with these kinds of conversations in a certain political context. I just wish I just I was just thinking of, like, if I had assigned this, for instance, to my students, without this kind of conversation, I think, were they to actually read the whole thing, they would, again, you just kind of walk away with, wow, it's really messed up and conspiratorial. It's just a web of just abuse and violence and power. There's really not, I don't know, and then it could just easily become whatever. But they do talk about, the notorious COP, the Rap and Tell Pro, and Puffy going to these clubs in the red zone, where according to this video, it's just a lot of wild and very free behavior, shall we say, was taking place. And then you see all these other overlaps. This is Roy Cohn, who was, the Trump kingmaker. And if you see that new movie about Trump and see what Roy Cohn, I mean, if you get, however accurate that depiction is, and we all know what that might be like, but anyway, Roy Cohn here with the dude from Club 54, Steve Rubell. So I mean, it's Studio 54. I mean, it's again, and they're just painting this picture, like, they're not really saying, and then Puffy did this or so and so did that. They're just saying, hey, he was just in these spaces with these kinds of people. There's a lot of wild sex and abuse. And Aaron Hall from Guy, who, is it true he still disappeared? Once it became known that Aaron Hall was showing up in some of these documents with Puffy, Aaron Hall dipped out. Thought that was interesting. But a lot of people, I mentioned the other day on the Remix Morning Show on Black Liberation Media, of course. Friday morning, I mentioned that Devontae Swing from Jodeci is mentioned in here, but then I also read recently that he was exonerated, but he was accused of in this story of watching. They get into, of course, Clive Davis shown here signing Whitney Houston. But again, Clive coming out of these same kinds of spaces, and then here's the connection to the CIA through William Casey and his connection to Roy Cohn, and and to Les Wexner, and then and this Tesla guy who ends up in Epstein's black book. I mean, so it's like there's all, but again, what exactly is being said here and why, it's not really been made clear. So maybe she'll lay it out in parts 2 and 3. But so far and I mean, all of these dudes are accused of some wild stuff in here, some abuse, v- really trifling and wild behavior. You got Brett Ratner being brought up in this as well, who was just recently back hanging out with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, seen here much earlier with Michael Jackson and Puffy. But then Ratner is shown here with Elon and Trump at this earlier this year. But just that he was friends with Puffy, they worked with Puffy. Puffy had a part in behind the scenes, apparently, in New Jack City, and that's how the Ratner connection comes in, and the Hollywood stuff. I mean, so now this was something that I did want to talk about, that I think is one of the kind of things that concern me a little bit about this, because now I don't know about a lot of the research that uh, Webb cites in this story. She does talk about John Potash, who obviously I've interviewed a number of times, read his work and appreciate his work. So that's maybe one source that I'm familiar with. But a lot of the other sources, I didn't really vet the sources. I didn't really, I just read this actually a couple of times with a kind of wild fascination and concern. And this part, this has always kind of bothered me. She makes reference to this anonymous industry letter from that claims in 1991 that the author witnessed a discussion about the intentional manipulation of rap music. I've actually come to say that this letter that I've been hearing about for years, Wise Intelligent has talked about it. So many other people have talked about it, but I come to think of it more as an equivalent to the Willie Lynch letter. Not that it doesn't describe some accurate manipulation of African people, but it's not itself real. And it's cited here uncritically and even references a scholarly source that supports the letter that I'm going to get to in just a minute, which leads me to a little bit of concern. This could be my tendency is to say I just think this is another case of inexperience with Black history, with hip hop history, with Black studies, and I hope it's just that. I hope it's not a broader sign of a sort of flawed approach in research. But anyway, but the letter here, excerpted here, says, quickly after the meeting began, one of my industry colleagues, who shall remain nameless like everyone else, including the author, thanked us for attending. He then gave the floor to a man who only introduced himself by his first name and gave no further details about his personal background. I think he was the owner of the residence, but it was never confirmed. He briefly praised all of us for the success we achieved in our industry, blah, blah, blah. The subject quickly changed as the speaker went on to tell us the very respective companies we represented had invested in a very profitable industry, which would become even more rewarding with our active involvement. He explained that the companies we worked for had invested millions in the building of privately owned prisons, and that our positions of influence in the music industry would actually impact the profitability of these prisons. We were told that these prisons were built by privately owned companies that received funding from the government based on the number of inmates. The more inmates, the more money the government would pay these prisons. It was also made clear to us that since these prisons are privately owned, as they became publicly traded, we'd be able to buy shares. So, longer story short, the goal is to manipulate the popular form of the art so that it promotes the kind of behavior that would encourage criminal activity and Black people, men mostly going to prison. Webb then cites this story here, a professor emerita of ethnomusicology, Portia Maltsby, who says that claims to have been sent an email saying in the early 1990s, a former graduate student, then keyboardist for Stevie Wonder, called me upset that some record labels were actively recruiting Black men with criminal records to rap. He believed that they were encouraging criminal acts among his group. In addition, prominent rappers have claimed from the 1990s onward that the music industry is financially entangled with the private prison industry and encourages criminal behavior through hip hop due to those entanglements. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but this is sort of what was bothering me about this, and I forgot where somewhere in the story she references. So when she references Portia Maltsby, the citation, the reference, because I was curious about that, takes you to this article here from Alicia Lola Jones. The music industry funds private prisons. The journal American Music, winner of 2022, University of Illinois Press. And it's fascinating, but the music industry funds private prisons, analyzing hip hop urban legend. Professor Jones here uses African culture and tradition as a means of analyzing the veracity of this letter, this urban legend. Okay. I'm not mad at the method. I'm not even mad at her conclusions that because of African traditions, we should accept the oral and unsupported history of this urban legend. In other words, she's saying that it should be accepted more or less as accurate based on. I'm not, on the one hand, I don't agree, by the way. I don't agree with that conclusion. I don't think that, I think very differently. I think that it should not be taken any differently than the Willie Lynch letter. It should be criticized, particularly by scholars, because it does not have, there is no proof, there is no evidence. And I don't like, I don't, you know, and I don't like giving such value to African culture and oral traditions and storytelling and the power of the griot. I don't think that that should be taken, that those traditions should be applied in this way, because fully formed and functioning African societies in which, and she uses the word griot. I was always encouraged not to, that was a French term. I was always a French derived term. I was always encouraged that we should say hala, but I don't, that, you know, who knows? But the point is the oral tradition in African societies in, you know, more or less fully formed African societal context may be one thing, but in this context, it becomes more of a game of telephone. It becomes more of a game of apocryphy, and it doesn't do us any service. Sort of to the point I'm making in my criticism of this web article, in helping us develop an analysis by just saying that we should use African story, you know, storytelling traditions to give veracity to this urban legend. It depoliticizes it, and again allows us to drift off into unsubstantiated conspiracy theory instead of a political analysis of the interlocking relationships that bind us in this colonial setting. Yeah, I mean, essentially, that's the argument of the article. It's not. It's. And then, by the way, in her notes, she's citing, you know, Billy Carson and 19 Keys and the Anunnaki stuff and Yvette Carnell. These are just not sources that I think. In other words, I think these are sources appropriate to the apocryphal nature of the claim of that letter. So I'm just not a fan of, so to me, when Webb cites that scholarship to support this urban legend without there being any particular, you know, Black studies or Africana studies or appreciation for uh, maybe a way to interpret, in my case, to disagree with it. I think it again just supports the I think the tone of this so far part one of the series, which is again it kind of, you know, by the way, so that was the other thing I meant to show, that they talk about this whole connection of the music industry to the prison industry, but in and I will add the link to this if folks ever want to follow up. I just wanted to give a shout out to this is now, wow, what is that? 14 years old? No, 9 years old. Hip hop prisons and mass media: the evil triplets of corporate ownership. This is an interview I did with the forgot what new name he took, but the formerly known rapper Homeboy Sandman, and salute to him because he's an amazing MC. But he had written this article on the secret relationship between prison and the music industries, and a lot of those similar topics are covered that are brought up in Webb's article. That is the companies like Wackenhut and Corrections Corporation of America, all having incestuous corporate relationships with the music industry. But again, in our discussion, that is mine with Homeboy Sandman, it's framed very differently, more along the lines of what I've been talking about here. Here, these same very real bits of history, hip hop, Black and otherwise, are, I think, I don't know if I'm not thrilled with the frame. I'm just, again, I'm, you know, and similarly, I mean, again, it's not to there's a lot here, but there's an important piece missing: the political frame. That's all. At the same time, Wackenhut and the CIA connected figures were apparently helping repurpose Iran Contra. So there's, you know, so again, she brings up Gary Webb, the Dark Alliance, the import, you know, Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross, the importation of drugs to not suppress Black revolution, but to fund illegal activity. And that's where she brings in the work of Potash, and starts talking a little bit about, but again, doesn't even bring his in his political frame. Often, you know, at least so far, often connected to the suppression of Black radical politics and the specific uh, oppressive nature of society. For me, the colonialism, of course, here comes, she mentions Vlad hosting a discussion of Rick Ross and all that, you know. These music industry, organized crime intelligence, and federal enforcement connections are also hugely significant, as Death Row, in conjunction with Combs' Bad Boy Records, was one of the primary Trojan horses by which gangster rap was injected into the culture, often at the expense of more radical activists and outright revolutionary hip-hop acts. Right on. Give her credit for bringing that point up, making that point, and at least acknowledging it, even if it isn't sort of, a sustained focus. But and also it's not, I think expanded upon as a point. Why would this be done? What is the value of revolutionary music in the culture, or at least non-harmful music? So far, it's just everybody's gross, corrupt, and violent and hostile, which is true, but it doesn't encourage that we get, and as she concludes here, ultimately Combs, like some other prominent entertainers, was servile to his music industry masters. He worked within a system those masters controlled and attempted to expand his own influence and power within that system, but at the end of the day, he was never in charge. But anyway, definitely, I'm gonna keep reading the series, and maybe even checking some of those links that she puts in there. I should say, by the way, I was a little bit critical here, but it's well written, and again, a fascinating read. I just would like to add a little bit of the political frame to it, and I'm really not thrilled with that, because you could. This is sort of my point. You could make. I think I did it humbly. I think others have done it as well. You can demonstrate how these outcomes are constructed in terms of the manipulation of the popular form of the culture, whatever cultural expression, without leaning on something that has no basis, that has no support, that relies on one scholarly article that makes a compelling, but I think insufficient argument around why we should accept something with no proof as being real, because in African culture, urban legends point to real things all the time. We don't need that. You can demonstrate. She does talk a little bit about some of the mechanism. You can demonstrate through payola, ownership, interlocking boards, through statements, through other forms of anti-colonial media theory, analysis, and argumentation. You can do it without saying, "Hey, by the way, there was this thing that somebody said that with other people that have in somewhere at some time," and so that's why I think it's more like the Willie Lynch letter. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.